of us feel called to careers that have meaning, work that lets us make the world kinder, safer, and healthier. Social work is that kind of calling. Social workers are top providers of mental health care in the United States, and the field has a wide variety of rewarding career paths. You might work in a school, a center that specializes in recovery from addiction, a government agency that secures the wellness of children, a nonprofit organization, or a hospital. Indiana University's School of Social Work is the highest ranked and largest in the state. For over 100 years, we have provided innovative instruction to students who are passionate about helping others. You can pursue a degree no matter where you live in Indiana. Social work programs are offered on 7 IU campuses and online. You'll learn from caring faculty and gain hands-on experience through internships, whether you are seeking your bachelor's or master's in social work. If you are interested in a career in research, we also offer Indiana's only PhD program. So if you are ready to explore a career that's rewarding, challenging, and never boring, the IU School of Social Work is ready to help you change the world.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us to talk about the roles of essential workers, essential social workers, and the roles that we play. Victor, Sarah, Valon, thank you for joining us and joining our virtual audience to have this robust discussion. What I'd like to do first is I want you to introduce yourselves, formally introduce yourself, tell us, what degree you hold, and what current position you have, and anything else you feel like you want us to, the audience to know about you. And then we're just going to go into it. I think that this is something that everybody should be listening to today. So I'll start with you, Victor.
Great. Thanks, Janetta. My name is Victor Manalo, and I am currently the president of the California chapter of NASW. Just started my term in July. And I am a retired associate professor from the School of Social Work at California State University, Los Angeles. And, but I'm still teaching there, still lecturing there because I love teaching. And I've been since then active in my community as a consultant and working on some projects. But I have also served in public office. I was an elected official for the city of Artesia, which is here in the southeast part of Los Angeles County. And I am so proud to be a professional social worker and a member of NASW, and I'm really, really excited to be a part of this panel this morning.
Great. Thank you, Victor. Valon, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, good morning. I am Valon Alford. I'm a licensed clinical social worker based in Durham, North Carolina. I received my Master of Social Work degree from Howard University in Washington, D.C. And currently I work with the NFL Player Care Foundation. It's a nonprofit whose mission is to support the well-being of former NFL players. I'm also a licensed perinatal mental health provider, as well as a certified sexuality educator. And so I'm really happy to be here, especially as a former board member of NASW, Washington, D.C.
Awesome. Thank you. Sarah.
Hello, it's so great to be here. I'm Sarah Butz, Director of Public Policy at the National Association of Social Workers, headquarters office in Washington, D.C. I studied political science and social work in my undergrad. I hold a master's in social work from University of Maryland, Baltimore, and I'm currently enrolled in a public policy PhD program at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Prior to coming to the association, I helped to set up an academy for the profession, the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, and served as the first executive director of the Grand Challenges for Social Work Initiative, which is a research-informed social policy agenda. Early in my career, I worked in state and local government and nonprofits and for political appointees.
Awesome, awesome. And I am Janetta Coleman. I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am the owner of 2 companies. The first one is Montrell Partnerships, where we address project management for health and human services agencies. And so we just go after state contracts. And then the other is Genesis Mediation, where I'm working with couples who are either in a dissolution, i.e. divorce, or post-dissolution, it's after divorce, and we're experiencing some things and trying to get them to get away from being very adversarial. I am a licensed social worker and I have a master's in business management. And there's so much more I could say, but I really want to bring everybody into this discussion because already I've heard so many what I would consider quote unquote, non-traditional social work roles. We all, thought about social work, wanted to go into social work, but it doesn't necessarily appear that you all are in what people would think to be traditional social work roles. When people hear that, they think about just helping people, just kids, or CPS, or child welfare. So the real question here is, how did you get here? And how did your social work skills support your process in getting to where you are? Because where you are is not where you started, and that is where the story is. So I want to start with you, Valon. Please tell us.
Absolutely. Well, I became very involved with NASW as a graduate student at Howard University. And I always had interest in direct practice as well as macro social work. And I remember having a conversation with my dean at the time and expressing my confusion pretty much on like, how do I navigate this? And she essentially encouraged me to go the clinical route. And so her advice as a macro practitioner was go the clinical route, get your skill set and, and expand upon that, find opportunities to sort of supplement what you're doing here. So that's what I did with NASW. I completed a 10-week summer internship through SAMHSA between my first and second year. And so I've always kind of dabbled with that person-to-person work and then the larger community kind of work. And so immediately after graduate school, I started in child welfare. I think it's a badge of honor for a lot of us. And it was very rewarding, but it was also very stressful for me. I didn't feel like I had the best work-life balance. There was a lot of vicarious trauma, things like that. And so I started to think not necessarily of what I wanted to do. Like I meet a lot of social workers in my current role who come up to me and say, hey, I've always wanted to be a sports social worker. I really had no idea what that was until I became one. I just knew I started to learn more of what I didn't want, what I needed more of, balance, a supportive work environment. I wanted to travel, have autonomy and things like that. So with each role that I've had, I've tried to seek that out. So I left child welfare and worked with veterans for a few years with the VA and then with DOD. And those roles were great, but each role sort of highlighted to me again, things that I liked and things that I didn't like. And that's where I really started to dabble in perinatal mental health. But what I saw a common string was everyone would kind of talk to me about just life and like relating to people, but also the systems that they found themselves navigating. And so for me, it was really about recognizing for myself as a social worker that my skill set is very transferable, whether I'm at a custody hearing or I'm talking to a veteran about readjustment. And so I started to really just write out, honestly, a prayer about the role that I wanted, money that I wanted, all these kinds of things in terms of what I thought my ideal career might look like. And it didn't have a title, it didn't have a population per se. I just knew that as someone with a background in working with children and families, that everything that affects children and families is bigger than just some of the traditional roles, and not to diminish any of those roles by far, because they are very important. But I just started to realize whether you work in the schools or in mental health or on Capitol Hill, all of that is affecting children and families. And especially right now, as we see in this current pandemic, we're all affected by everything. And so I really just started to chisel out things that I wanted to do. And I really started to think that I want to be doing something that's a little bit non-traditional, because all of my friends and family, whether they were blue collar or JDs, like everyone would just kind of call and get information. And I was thinking like, okay, I need to be working in an environment that is a little bit non-traditional to help other people see just how much and how vast our skill set is. And so I really started to just network, and someone referred me to my current position, actually. And so they really kind of wanted to know more about me and my background, whereas I was thinking maybe I need to study football teams and stats. And thank goodness for mentors, because, my mentor said, I'm pretty sure they have people for that. If they're talking to you, they want you because of the specific skill set that you have. And especially working with former football players, there are a lot of similarities with this population that coincide with coming from a military background, with the readjustment, with the trauma, with the physical injuries and mental health and things of that nature. So there's a lot of overlap, and I'm happy to be one of a team of 4 right now at my organization, where they really value the input that social workers bring. So that's kind of how I got here in a quick bite.
But I'm sure that quick bite was actually sort of a long bite, because what I heard is that you were following what your passion was. A lot of times, when I first mentioned that I was going into social work, the first thing I would get, the response back was like, you're not going to make any money. Like, a lot of people will have that thought because they feel like you should do this and do it for not the money. And, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing it for the money, but I want to touch people and I want to have an impact. And you were looking at your skill set and like, I want flexibility. You were looking at what you wanted that would make you happy doing the profession that you're doing. And I can appreciate that, because I too wanted flexibility. Started in child welfare, home-based counseling, foster care, programs running that, as well as a group home. And I love those things. And I really feel like anybody who worked in a group home, you can do anything after that. Like, really, that is absolutely, in my mind, that is the pinnacle. You can do anything that you want. But I think we start to understand some of the parameters and restraints that some of those positions can have. And I'm not knocking them because they're wonderful, because, when you're in a group home, you only have them for a certain amount of time that are with you. And for me, I wanted to be able to go with them for however long they needed me. Because a lot of times people need services and need assistance longer than just 6 months or, 6 weeks or whatever it happens to be. And we start doing things and springboarding those skill sets that we have. I started doing trainings for, those within the profession, within the agency, and it just kind of springboarded into people asking me to do more trainings. And so somehow, lo and behold, I started doing very large events for Indiana Department of Child Services, Indiana University, and other social service providers. And it worked because I'm a social worker. I understood what they wanted, what they needed, so, they wanted to know what's, the next big thing that's happening. When is the pendulum shift going to happen? And so for me, I found my niche in that, in doing trainings and events. But I also found that I wanted the flexibility to work with families on a whole nother level, which is how I arrived into doing mediation as well. But what I found very interesting, and Victor, I want to go to you because you really worked in, you held an official office, and now you're doing something else and you're teaching. Talk to us about how you got there.
Wow. Well, can I fill up the rest of the 90 minutes that we have here? I mean, this is a long story, but no, I'll try to keep it a brief bite, like Valon did. So I think you mentioned before when we met, Janetta, and I think you mentioned that, I wanted to be a clinician. That was my goal when I went to get my MSW. And I had worked at a group home. So yes, I've got the scars to prove it. And when I was in the group home and I saw the LCSW come in and work with the kids, I was like, oh my God, that is totally what I want to do for the rest of my life, is just work with kids and do therapy and all that stuff. So when I got into my MSW program, I mean, obviously I was thrilled. I was excited after the first year. I was in a 3-year program. So after the first year, I'm like, oh my God, I'm totally on the road to where I'm supposed to be. Loving life. Then I started my first internship. It was a clinical internship at a counseling center in Los Angeles. And after the first semester, my supervisor was like, oh my God, was giving me all these, was getting such great feedback. She's like, oh my God, you're so good. And I'm just like flying high. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going towards my goal. Well, that was at the end of 1990. And then in the spring semester, which was in the spring of 1991, something happened in Los Angeles. And I'm sure many of you know what happened. And that was the Rodney King verdicts came out in the spring of 1991. And where my internship was located was pretty much right in the middle of South Central. And now I was fortunate that I did not have any direct interaction with the uprisings or the events happening during that time. But I have to tell you, that was the most significant thing that happened to me in that internship. And it was really like it was a revelation to me. And, you mentioned passion earlier. I like to think of following my gut, because I don't think we talk about that in social work. We don't talk about the relevance of the gut, right? And if you're in child welfare, you know what that is, or when you're working with people, that sometimes you get a gut feeling about things, and that's not something that you can measure or explain, but I got that gut feeling, and it was more pronounced when I would look around and see the fires, the looting, the violence. And to me, it made perfect sense what was happening out there in the community. I said, it's related to what's happening in these 1-hour sessions that I'm having with my clients. My clients are frustrated. My clients are lost. They don't know how to deal with the things that the oppression that they have to deal with in everyday life. So when I looked out there, I said, this makes perfect sense to me. And my gut was telling me, you don't want to be here in the therapy room. You want to be out there where all the action is. And that changed my life, changed my professional life. And that's when I decided I wanted to be out in the community and kind of figure out what was going on. And so that and many other things, mentors, Valon mentioned, obviously were so important to me. Other social workers along the way that encouraged me and said, hey, you could be an elected official, or you could do this in public policy. I was fortunate enough to study under Dr. Bruce Jansen, who some of you may recognize him from policy books here at USC. And he was a great influence to me as well, saying, there's a whole world out there in this public policy world if you want to get into it. And after a series of other events that happened in my professional career, after I decided to pursue community work, it led me to being an elected official. And I never would have thought, never in a million years would have thought that I would be sitting here talking to you about my experience as an elected official when I started out in an MSW program. And I continue to I just told my students yesterday, I said, there's such a huge world out there. Like you said, Jeanette, there's such a huge world and opportunities for social workers like we're seeing here today, that it really is, you can't limit yourself to just focusing on the clinical aspect, even though it may be what you end up doing, but eventually, like Valon said, you might go into other areas of practice. So that's my story.
You mentioned some serious pieces here, because, just when you talked about, the riots and the impact that had on you, I think often when we begin to make a shift in our careers, there was a moment of an aha. It could have been a trauma moment. It could have been a extremely successful moment that you just didn't anticipate how successful it was going to be, but yet and still it was impactful for you. And I think that that's probably where a lot of people's stories start. And so now that we think about this pandemic right now that we're in, a lot of people are reevaluating, what they're doing, what they have been doing. Do I want to continue to spend my time doing, this piece? And so I think that that's really critical. I like how you talk about, your gut, following your gut. I think, as we continue to talk and as our audience is listening, often what we were going to do was already sitting there. It was already sitting there. So for me, I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was always sitting in my spirit. I've known since I was a kid that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't know what that was going to be. And I love that you say, there's a whole big world, because honestly, 24 years in child welfare, that's what led me to, publish my book, finally, to talk about the exploration and self-discovery for foster youth. So my book is Surviving Foster Care, and it just came out a couple of weeks ago. But it took a lifetime of work to write that, to say to foster youth and those who have been in care, there's so much more available to you. There's so much more you can do. You can actually use what has been a trauma moment, what has been some successes in your life to springboard you into something else. So I love the things that you were saying. And for Sarah, I don't want to miss you in all of this discussion and where you are and how you got there. Tell us about it.
So I grew up in Baltimore City, the eldest of 3 kids. I was exposed to the difficulties of life very early in my life. My family was in the produce business, and so I would travel around to different markets in Baltimore, and I was deeply inspired by my lived experience. And so I spent about 10 years working in the service industry in restaurants, waiting tables and bartending to get myself through undergraduate and graduate school. I had a young daughter when I was a student. She's 19 now. So I thought initially that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was studying political science, and I still am probably more skilled in policy than counseling, right? But in my classes, the pre-law track, I was always arguing the justice point, and my peers had a different point of view. And I thought, maybe I'm in the wrong place, That's when I learned that there was a macro track in social work, and I went over to social work, and I'll be honest, it was difficult because the adjustment to writing pre-law kind of writing and moving into social work, talking about what the room feels like and what the carpet looks like and things. I mean, it was a difficult adjustment. I kept on saying, you're going to learn about the systems through this work, and you can still do macro practice. So I was a clinical and macro concentrator. I learned that foster care was one of the toughest assignments. So I volunteered to intern in public child welfare, in foster care in particular, and with the thought that I'm going to understand how the structure of these departments works and how political appointees manage these systems, okay? I ended up interning for the executive director of the Social Services Administration that oversaw 24 departments of social services in the state of Maryland. And lo and behold, after graduate school, they hired me as a policy analyst, which is a very unusual position for a new grad. Most of my peers at the state at that time had been there for 20 plus years. And I was pretty much an assistant to the director. And at the time, they were initiating pretty significant public child welfare reform in the state. So I was privy to the leadership in the state, and some of the folks that I work for, the former governor even went on to run for the president of the United States. And so that kind of kicked off a career where I had to kind of navigate outside of social work, kind of where I was going to work and compete with other disciplines. I ended up working at a nonprofit in Baltimore City where the director was an appointee of the mayor. before going into academia and working for Dean Richard Barth, who was the founding president of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, and launching this Grand Challenges initiative. I actually wanted to be an elected official. I thought I can represent the interests of the people. It doesn't surprise me that I'm in this role at NASW, but I do have to say that there have been these moments where I want to pinch myself throughout my career, because I consider myself just an average girl, from Baltimore City. And now I walk the halls of the House and Senate on behalf of our profession, the largest social work organization in the world. And part of the kind of way that I navigated this and was able to figure out how to get to where I am is looking for opportunities to work for really smart people. So that it wasn't so much about what I was focused on, it was, can I learn from this job? Can I improve my skill set? And is my boss really smart? So, I've been fortunate. To have great supervisors and mentors over the years.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point in terms of watching, because I'm glad that you mentioned, the macro level, you have the meso level, and then you have the micro level. And it sounds like for most of us, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're on the macro level. Do you feel in being in that realm, do you feel distant from the micro? Because we all started out in the micro. We had to learn what our skills were and what we were going to be doing when we were new folks in the profession of social work. Do you feel disconnected from it? Because when you step into what people would consider to be a non-traditional setting, like I had no idea that there was an NFL social worker. That sounds so cool. Do you feel distant from the profession itself? And then how do you keep yourself in that profession and keeping your skills sharp? Because you may be in your positions by yourself. There may not be other social workers around you consistently that are doing what you're doing.
For me, I feel like my role at the NFL Player Care Foundation is a little bit unique in the sense of we created it. So my colleague, Nate Recknagel, he was the first social worker at our organization and then helped to bring me on. And then we've added social work interns, and we also have a recent MSW graduate. So I think our role is very unique because both of us, Nate and I, we do have a clinical background. And so it's more of that meso work. We have some program development where we're talking about mental and behavioral health for former players. And what does that look like? What kind of chronic and psychosocial issues are they dealing with? And how might we be able to be a conduit to help them navigate those things and access benefits and resources and get connected to clinical professionals. Then also, how are we taking the information that we're receiving from them, their spouses and relatives, how are we taking that information and then going back and saying on a larger issue, this is what former players are dealing with, and how can we then advocate for programming, for resources, for support? Because one thing that I found when I accepted this position and I would fly into New York for a board meeting and I'd be in the cab and people would say, "Oh, are you here for work?" And I'm like, "Yep." And so it depends on what kind of day I'm having and how much I want to divulge, because, you all have experienced it, I'm sure, but when you share that you're a social worker, the conversations can go lots of ways. And so when you add on, you work for the NFL, NFL Player Care Foundation, quite often what I would get is, why do football players need a social worker? Like, why would an NFL player need a social worker? What kind of problems would they have? And for me, I'm like, well, they are people too. And that's usually my answer. I actually did a presentation on that, but at the end of the day, we're all people. And so they're navigating lots of issues that many of us are navigating. And so I think my role is really unique in that sense, that I still day to day I'm working with players, but not in a clinical capacity, more of a as a subject matter expert. So I'm helping them to talk about the nuances of topics, like if there's someone who might be interested in counseling, but a lot of times stigma is big. So I'm in the background saying, if you have a preference, you don't have to be politically correct. Like this is the time to say, I would prefer someone with a similar ethnicity or what have you. And I'm able to educate and say, just because someone might have a similar background doesn't mean that they might get it. And just because they don't doesn't mean that they won't, but it's an opportunity. And therapy is really about relationships. So I'm able to kind of address some of those barriers so that when I do make a connection and I do make a referral, hopefully they're more likely to be meaningful. And so I think it's really unique in that way that I have the day-to-day contact with former players and their families, but also in them then able in my organization to work on program development in different ways that we can advocate on behalf of former players and their families.
Thank you for that, because people are people. I've been on the plane before where people are like, "Oh, what do you do? I'm a social worker," and then they want to tell you everything because that's what people know is to tell a social worker everything, and we can fix it. I wish I could say we had the magic bullet for everything, but the point is that people are people no matter what profession they're in. Everybody needs help with something, and you have transferable skills that can assist in that profession that you're in. Sarah, you brought up a good point about how at the beginning you thought that you wanted to go into, law, but you ended up in public policy, which has a foundation there. And I think that's a key point. And I can even say, going into mediation, that has foundation and transferable skills. So for instance, as I'm sitting in meetings with attorneys and judges, and we're talking about family law and mediation, they're looking at me saying, I wish I had your skill set in terms of talking with people, and I'm looking at them saying, hey, I wish I knew the law like you did. And so it's that transferable piece. And so Sarah, for you, how do you keep yourself being where you are, and grounded in your skill set when some around you may not be, but again, you're doing public policy at NSW, so it may not be too difficult, but then again, it might be because you feel like you may be so much far on the macro side and not so much entrenched on the micro level.
So I use my clinical skills every day. Most of us in our jobs know that relationships and our networks are how we really get work done. The extent to which you can develop strong relationships with colleagues is that they become the folks that you can call when you want to advance a piece of legislation, or you need an expert review, or you want to identify a panelist for a presentation that the association's putting together. I take care to identify myself as a social worker in public spaces. Not that long ago, before the pandemic, I was invited by members of Congress to participate in a congressional roundtable with about 30 other organizations. And I was probably one of the only non-lawyers in the room. Okay, so most folks that we work with are JDs, and there's a reason for that. They're taught how to develop the drafts of bills, how to cite the statutes, there's a tremendous, you can learn a lot from their skill set, right? In doing this work, we have a learning curve, so that's challenging. But I identify as a social worker. Then I say I'm also the director of public policy at NASW. And sometimes I even disclose some of my lived experience, like the fact that my mom was a substance user, and so that in Congress, that kind of perspective is valued. And there's probably people that I work with that think this is a strength and also a weakness. And so I have to work through that, and I've been on calls where they say, Sarah, you're a social worker. It's clearly because I've said something that indicates I'm not an attorney. And I wear it as a badge of honor. I will say this, it helps to have dual training. It helps to have interdisciplinary training. One of the benefits of that is that you can associate and identify yourself with two different professions potentially. And then you can leverage those professions on your behalf. I did not feel fortunate enough in my MSW program to also study law just because of the sheer cost. I am in a public policy program that is part-time now. It is in person. It's very demanding. Eventually, I'll earn that credential. But you can still make progress without the dual training, but it's a constant learning process. So I'm a proud social worker, Janetta.
You should be, and I know that we all are. It is just so amazing, to hear how our skill sets are transformed. I always identify as a social worker first and foremost, because that is who I am at heart. And like you, having a story, when you share certain things, people are like, okay, I can connect with that. My mother is a social worker. We actually graduated in the same year in different schools, but she's a social worker. My father is a retired educator. So this is something that's been in me for a long time. And I think for all of you, it's been in you as well. So, Victor, same, question about that whole macro versus, having the micro and keeping yourself, grounded in what you do. What are your thoughts on everything?
Well, I think that, you mentioned at the beginning about, our being non-traditional. And I really would like us to kind of, refocus that or reframe that as being that we should be traditional. I mean, like we said earlier, these are all social work roles. And so we really need to start seeing ourselves as in this very comprehensive and complex way. I think we've always been kind of distraught by the fact that we could easily explain what we do as social workers, like doctors can, right? But I think we need to embrace that and really lift that up. That we are all social workers, and and so to get back to your question, though, I like to tell people, or I've been telling people lately, because I served for about 12 years on the city council. And in 2018, I lost my reelection. I was going up for another term, and I lost my reelection. And so since then, I've been telling people I'm a recovering elected official, because now I'm trying to get back to my social work roots. Because one of the things, that that maybe Sarah can kind of understand, because it's kind of this public policy space is similar, that I was starting to lose my empathy for people, because my constituents were my clients, basically, right? And so at the very beginning of my term, when I first got on the council, and we had the recession hit, and I was elected in 2007. The recession hit in 2008. So we had to cut budgets in our city, and it was a very difficult time. We had to cut a daycare program that we had subsidized in the city. And I had parents and family members who were my people I knew in the community. We went to church together. We were neighbors, and they would come up to to testify and say, please don't cut this program. And I could feel, I felt the empathy. I knew that this was going to be a difficult decision for me. But later on, you kind of get used to the fact that everyone's calling you councilman, and everyone's, you go to an event and everyone recognizes you, and you start doing these really important things. You're meeting all kinds of folks. You get to meet, Congress people and state level officials. And I was very active in kind of regional associations and regional committees and things, because I wanted to expand my network and get to know people, because like Sarah said, that's those relationships that you build is that's how politics works, is by getting to know people. But then there came a point in time when it was more important. I felt it was, and I don't want to express this in a negative way, but there are things that I wanted to get done in the city that I thought were of benefit to the rest of the city, to the city in general, to the people that lived in my city, that people did not agree with. And so while I tried to feel as much empathy as possible as I could with them, I also felt like I had a responsibility that was much greater than to certain individuals that did not like what I was proposing. So I don't want to say, maybe I said at the beginning, maybe I said it incorrectly. It's not that I was losing my empathy, but I had to balance, right? That was very difficult. I had to balance hundreds of thousands of different interests in my city with what I felt with the best information I had, what would be the best decision for us as a council to move forward as a city, especially in the light of that recession. Because I never, ever wanted our city to get to the point where we might be in a fiscal emergency, which we were at the time, and to possibly, become insolvent as a city. So I've always had to kind of continue to negotiate that. But it's the relationships. I want to get back to that key, because I think that's the most important thing, is maintaining those relationships. And in the public sector, doing this type of work, you hope that those relationships will last, whether you make decisions that are against you might perceive are against you or against your best interests or not. And it's the strength of those relationships that are important. And I'm so happy that even after being out of office now for almost 4 years, that I still have very strong relationships across LA County with elected officials, because I've been able to take those relationships and use them to connect people who need to be empowered in their own communities and their organizations.
Yes, yes. Relationships are so important, because I think all of us become a conduit for change. That's ultimately what we all want, is to be a conduit for change, and we're willing to put ourselves in a essential role. And I thank you, Victor, for saying that, because yes, non-traditional to the public, they would think, but you're right. We really are essential to everything, because everything we do is about relationships and relating. And the moment that there is discord or difficulty, this is where the skill set is really transferable. And so, you talked about, losing a sense of empathy, or feeling like you're losing a sense of empathy. And I think sometimes what happens is that we get a little burnt out on some things. And that kind of makes me think about the next question I had in my mind is, what were some of the unexpected realities of what you're doing right now? What were some unexpected realities? I'm going to let anybody jump in who wants to jump in on that one.
When I started working in state government, I realized how vulnerable executives and appointees and staff even are in government, and how cutthroat it is. And that you could literally be charged with running a program and not be invited to the meetings to discuss the program. Or that, there's a conversation that happens behind closed doors, and then there's a public presentation and it's different information. And kind of like what I was really in, like the level of leadership that I was privy to, and the level of scrutiny that individuals I was working for were under, and the pressure they were under. And what I could have never expected is that would increase, and that my involvement and knowledge of these things would increase. So I remember, in my second year internship thinking, I was writing the presentations for my boss and writing the legislative testimony, but she or he were up there delivering these remarks in the presentation, and I would listen to the feedback, right? And I thought, I could never get up there and tell this community X, Y, and Z about this department on a daily basis and face this kind of pushback, right? And criticism. And over the course of my career, if I think of like a ladder, I just kept on climbing the ladder. And the thing that I thought I couldn't do last week, I ended up doing less than a year later. And the pressure mounts and mounts. And as now, I like I took this job at National, which NASW has one of the largest policy portfolios in all of DC, cover workforce and, you know, the whole lifespan of social justice issues. I receive emails from members from congressional offices every day on complex policy matters that it can be overwhelming. And we have to balance, to your point, Victor, the kind of requests that are coming from an individual and or a member with the collective, okay? What is in the best interest of the whole collective, and where can I make the best impact at a given point in time? And I don't think that anyone could fully appreciate the stress and the difficulty and the limited amount of funds. Like if I could just accommodate every request or advocate for every request, I would, but there's a limited amount of funds for these things. So I can really identify with your remarks, Victor, and that is absolutely true in public policy. You can't make friends with everyone because someone's always mad at you.
Sure.
Sarah, when I'm back out in DC, we're gonna have to sit down and have a really long dinner and conversation.
I love that.
But I'd like, if I could just jump in real quick, Janetta, one of the great things I think that I've learned from being an elected official is I kind of went into this partly with the mind of what my full-time job was, which was I was a professor at a social work program in a university. So part of me went into this because I wanted to learn what this was all about so that I could go back in the classroom and tell my students that this is what it's all about. And what I came out of 12 years of being an elected official was a greater respect for our democratic system of government, especially at the local levels, and the fact that we don't spend enough time. And of course, we don't spend enough time in MSW program. It's 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. We just don't have enough time to do everything. But I felt it to be my mission to let social workers know how important local government is to their every single day lives, and also to our clients, because local government has everything to do with we call it quality of life issues, right? So when you wake up in the morning after the day after you put your trash out and your trash is collected, that's a local government issue. We all know now that after what's happened with George Floyd, that law enforcement is a local government issue. We know that whether you have parks in your neighborhood, whether you can walk safely on nice sidewalks or well-lighted sidewalks, or whether you have access to public transportation or affordable housing, all of these issues are local government issues. And so I keep telling everybody that I can that you need to know, and it's the easiest way for us to get involved as social workers in the political system, because your local government officials, your elected city council people and county folks, they have offices in your neighborhood. They may be your neighbors. You may know their kids. You may have gone to school with them, right? So it's a very easy place to start and a great place to have impact on what's going on in your own community, in your own neighborhood, and even where you may be working as a social worker in that community. So.
Yeah, I kind of found, for me, some unexpected realities where, you don't know what you don't know yet sometimes. And so I think for each of us, there also had to be an entrepreneurial spirit within you to do some of the things that you're doing, so, and honestly, and it's just my perspective, entrepreneurship and social work don't always go hand in hand when people think about that. When you hear the word entrepreneurship, you think of a business sector of this. You don't think of a human service sector to this. And so for me, I really had to connect with business-minded individuals, CEOs of social service agencies, having those mentors, and just looking at it. Because for me, helping other people achieve their dreams and aspirations was something that was important to me. That was part of my entrepreneurial spirit. And so, but I had to go through that process and figure it out. Like a lot of people are like, well, what are you trying to do? I'm like, I just want to remove obstacles for people to reach whatever it is that they want. That's my whole point and what I do in social services. If you say to me, you want to be a designer, how do we get there? If you want to own your own business, okay, how do we get there? And it took some mentorship. And it also takes some guts to do exactly what you're doing. So how did you find what you needed to find in order to do the things that you're doing? Because there were some doors that opened along the way, but there was also information you had to figure out on your own that no one else could really assist you with. How does the entrepreneurial spirit play a part in being in an essential role in where you guys are?
I think tenacity is really a big part of that. And I think with social workers, I don't want to say it's innate, but it is something that is within us that I think a lot of our programs help us to develop. And like Victor said, a lot of what we do is gut plus. I remember one of my professors at Howard would always say, intervention and assessment is always gut plus. And so she would always, when we would kind of get caught up in, resuscitating a theory or, quoting somebody, and she would be like, okay, so, in real life, like, how do you apply that? How do you go from theory to, you're standing with, said client, and how do you really put all of that together? And for me, I really didn't have a blueprint. As Sarah mentioned, just lived experiences. I think they also really just shape us and who we are as people and how we show up. So I'm a first generation college student. My parents had me their senior year of high school. We're from Mississippi of all places. And so it really was just sort of figuring out things that I didn't know, and a lot of trial and error. And thank goodness for mentors and people who just took me out under their wings. And so I just started to learn more of things that I didn't know. And for me, being first generation, I think I'm so grateful for my experience at NASW. One of my professors actually told me about the MSW student representative role, and that was sort of my door in. But it allowed me to be at tables with my professors, with movers and shakers in the community, and especially attending graduate school in Washington, D.C. There are lots of people who headed national organizations or people who were on national boards. And so I was literally able to soak in, I'm used to hearing my name called, and I'm like, But what I didn't know at that time was it was really helping me to hear my own voice. So in child welfare, I recognized that, I would be writing a court report. So every court hearing that I would attend, everyone is, whether it was a parent's attorney or a foster parent's attorney or the guardian ad litem or the judge, the conversation all starts from this report that I wrote. And so for a long time, it frustrated me until I realized the power that was in writing that report. And so even with the nuances of, having conversations with my supervisor, when there was a time where maybe my professional opinion differed from what I was told that was the agency's point of view. And so how do you articulate, this clinician, like I'm the one supervising the visit or monitoring XYZ, how do I represent myself and keep my job? My job, I was first generation. So like, how do I keep my job and my bills paid? But how do I respectfully say, I don't agree, and this is the opinion of the organization that I'm representing, although my role is to represent the best interest of the child. And so I think those roles really helped me to become assertive in a sense of, this is my skill set. I'm trained, and my assessment stands on its own. And I think those things kind of helped me in various roles, even here in this entrepreneurial sort of role, because it's new. There's no blueprint. Being a government social worker, you can go pull up you can pull up a vacancy announcement, for a DoD social worker, and it's all there. Everything is there. But for this role, one thing that excited me, and the thing that also, gives me angst at times, is so much is unwritten. So it's a great opportunity. But at the same time, sometimes with it being so new, and there are a lot of business folks that I work with, people in marketing and communications and law. While I think that the social work perspective is appreciated, sometimes you have to be assertive and confident to really just say, this is my assessment and opinion or point of view, and this is why, and let that be that, and just know that you are adding something valuable. Because I think, like I said, with the tenacity, the assertiveness, having the mentorship, all of those things were ingredients for me that I feel has helped me to be where I am. So I'm really grateful to just have been in a place where I could literally soak in things from the greats. And I had no idea at the time, but just being able to sort of sit at the grown folks table as a graduate student, I think really, really helped me more than I realized. And that would be one thing. That's one thing I always say to students and emerging professionals, to really seek out opportunities where you can learn and grow and have some organic mentorship. I know there are a lot of programs, and I'm not saying that those aren't valuable, but when you can really have an organic connection where somebody is invested in your professional development, I think it's invaluable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sarah, Victor, anything you guys want to add to the idea about that entrepreneurial spirit, figuring out, how do I figure out what I don't know in order to get to where I'm going, because you could have went the private practice route. A lot of people do, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that may not have been where, part of your path. So anything about the entrepreneur spirit that you feel like is critical to get to where you are?
I'll just offer quickly that definitely entrepreneurial spirit is probably an essential kind of perspective or approach that you need to take if you reach this level of success. Once you're in leadership, you have to be entrepreneurial. But I would say that I spent a lot of time observing, listening, watching leadership, figuring out how to draft my ideas so that they could be responded to in an official way. It is very difficult to be entrepreneurial outside of the profession in the larger world. It's easier to be entrepreneurial just in social work, but what we have to do in public policy is be entrepreneurial with everyone else, i.e. the doctors, the lawyers, the government. I mean, this becomes extremely challenging. So even at a very micro level, you have to draft your ideas. They have to be well written. They have to be supported by science usually, or documented. And that takes time to develop the experience and expertise to get there. I would say that to do this work, you need to be comfortable with ambiguity. You have to have a high level of emotional intelligence, and it does take bravery and guts. You have to be really smart to compete in this kind of a space. And I'm reminded every day that I'm not necessarily the most bright person in the room. And that's hard, right? I leave a meeting and I'm like, okay, I've got to read this report because I'm not probleming. So yes to entrepreneurial, you have to be prepared. And it's I think a lifelong, career-long learning process. You have to be committed to being engaged.
I think it's interesting in all of our stories, and so many people that I've talked to that have gone into and are in, administrative positions or high level positions or entrepreneurs or all sorts of social workers, that we kind of have to create our own path, because there's a sense that none of us have a blueprint. Like there's no one we could turn to say, hey, like a fellow social worker that we graduated with or someone we work with, and say, hi, I want to go in this direction. Does anyone help me? And there doesn't seem to be that resource for us. And the same was for me when I decided I wanted to go into delve into the political realm. I had people that would pat me on the back and say, hey, good luck, that's great, and go for it. But I didn't have anyone easily accessible to me to tell me how to do it. So I had to get out there. I mean, one of my first experiences was working for a campaign against a proposition in California that was going to, if it passed, it would have cut. It was called AFDC back then. You all probably know what AFDC was. It was going to cut benefits by 30%. And it enraged me as a social worker to see that the government would even consider putting this out on the ballot for people to vote on, when the people that I was working with in child welfare would have taken the brunt of that proposition. So I got out there and I got on a campaign. I learned how to knock on doors. I learned how to read voter registration files. I learned I even learned that I had to take donuts to the precinct, at 7 o'clock in the morning, to thank all the precinct workers, because I was going to come in there during the day and I was going to check all the voter registration rolls and, going out and helping people to get to the polls on polling. I mean, it was such an awesome experience. And I thought, oh my God, why did I never know about this before? And so it was just, and I want to, what Sarah said before, I think was really important, is that, it can be scary and it could be discomforting, and you could be like thinking, what am I doing? I'm like all alone, and I'm forging this all by myself. But it is, it's wonderful. And when I look back on all of those experiences, I think, oh my God, how much did I take away from that? And how much did that contribute to who I am and where I am today? And so I think, sometimes you just kind of have to, jump off the deep end with the faith that you are heading in the right direction, and that you're going to take something away from it, because that's who we are as social workers. I mean, it's competence, right? We want to be competent no matter what we're doing. So if we're thrown in a situation where we have to sink or swim, well, you know what? We're going to swim. We're going to figure it out, because we want to be competent.
Yeah. But isn't that what we're asking the people that we work with, to jump out there, trust, have faith, in what you're trying to do? And we can't ask them to do those very things if we're not doing that in our own, professional, personal way, so that I can connect with how you're feeling being alone in your path. And so, as Sarah said, she talked about, observing and listening, to leadership. You have to be comfortable with the ambiguity, because everything that we're doing is so unique. And I had to be comfortable with that, and I look back and I really have to say, sometimes I'm like, I really have been an entrepreneur for over 15 years. And I don't think about it. I just do it. And people are like, what are you doing? And sometimes it could be a lonely road traveled, so when I say I do, contracts, I'm an MBE, WBE, people are like, what is that? Minority Women Business Opportunities. And so, yes, I'm working on contracts where I'm auditing programs, in the state who receive federal money from, another agency. How did I learn that? Because I was doing, COA, Council on Accreditation, in social work. We all know what that is. A lot of the audience members know exactly what that is, but that kind of transferable skills goes elsewhere when you're doing audits to community programs as well. So I think it really is something to be said about mentorship. It's something to be said about surrounding yourself with people who you feel are smarter than you, even though, Sarah, you are just as smart as them. It really is an important piece, because I think we just glean what we need from everybody, and that is so critical in that, that learning path. So what would be the best advice that you could provide or leave with the audience? And this isn't going to be a last question, but that you could leave with the audience in terms of, if they feel like they want to be in an essential role that is something different, what would be the first few steps to take if you want to really broaden your work and your profession and take your skills and use it in another setting? And I'll let anybody jump in on that.
So I'll say this, offer to do the job wherever you are, offer to do the work that no one else wants to do that's difficult. So one example might be learn the data system and how to run reports in the data system and be a resource. You'll get invited to the meetings, you'll have to explain the reports, this type of thing. There's no kind of task that's beneath you. I can't tell you how many times I ran coffee to the secretary's office or got tea for a meeting, even in director roles. And that you don't have, a lot of social workers are very focused on the population they want to work for versus the skill set they can improve or develop in a given position. And worry less about the title. The title, I mean, I don't, as long as I'm, effective and I create a reputation for high quality work and impact, right? Making progress. It doesn't really matter what I'm called, right? So I try to not focus on that too much. And so my work portfolio is going to be what gets me the next job. And I have to demonstrate each time that I really can do the next thing. So that's my advice. You can start this right now where you are.
I would just add on to what Sarah said. I think often when I'm speaking to students, especially, and I think back on myself being a graduate student, and I will tell people to write out what it is that you want, like write the vision. So write those things that you like and write those things that you want less of, because sometimes it's hard to, especially if you're looking at roles that may say social worker, or if you're, kind of population specific, sometimes we are unnecessarily limiting ourselves. So when you really kind of can go back to, I really like talking to people about healthcare. I really like working within my community. I really like what have you. Then you start, learning more words and the verbiage expands. So then you're talking about maybe health equity, or maybe you want to do policy, or, then you can kind of look at different roles, different opportunities to volunteer and network. I think a lot of people make a lot of good use out of LinkedIn. I don't think I did, but I'm just always amazed because people will send me a message and just say, hey, Valon, I saw you somewhere. I would love to connect with you. And so for as much as I can, I really do try to connect with people because, like I said, for me, I didn't have a lot of people that I could literally reach out to until I started working and volunteering with NASW. And let me go back and say maybe I didn't feel empowered to reach out to people. Maybe there weren't people that I knew personally, but that tenacity that I spoke of, it was something that grew inside of me. So I didn't know in this professional space, like, oh, can I really reach out to the director? Because you go to places and people say, oh, here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you want to connect. And I was always that person that like collect cards, like hoard the cards, but I would never like, oh, I can't connect with Janetta, she's so busy and, she won't have time. And it's like, well, she literally gave you her contact information. And so, what I found is oftentimes if you reach out to people, they will reach back, whether it's 10 minutes or 30 minutes or, hey, I have something coming up, but why don't you connect with my colleague? And so really just that connection and networking, because I think sometimes as social workers, we're so committed to helping others. And so one thing that I would just say is, you have to be able to use that skill set for yourself. And so being able to use those skills to say, no, I'm gonna help myself connect with Janetta. And, I don't know a lot about contracts, but that seems very interesting. Like, can I help you, with your organization, or can you tell me more about it? So I would just encourage folks to really take advantage of those opportunities.
I totally agree with that, Valon. I think my advice to people would be just network, because I know for sure I would not be here right now talking to you if it were not for the network that I developed ever since I started as a graduate student. Like Valon was saying, I was in the same boat. When I became a student and the executive director of the California chapter came to my university, I was in a meeting with him and the director of the School of Social Work. And I thought, who am I, this little graduate student sitting here with the executive director of the California chapter of NASW. But it really empowered me to think, wow, just by getting to know people and creating these professional relationships, I could really do a lot of stuff as a social worker. And I also want to reiterate what Sarah was saying. You also have to be willing to show people that you're working with that you're willing to be a team player, that you're willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done, whether it's mopping floors or whether it's getting food or whatever it is. Nothing is beneath us to do to show people that you are worthy of being trusted, that you are a good coworker, that you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get stuff done. So those are the two things. But networking definitely, and being a team player, I think, are most important things that you should be doing.
I love all of your guys' answers because I really feel like the relationships, it's there, right there. It's the networking, like you said. And, like Valon said, being dedicated, but sometimes we forget to be that for ourselves and then just have faith in what you're wanting to do. Because talking with individuals, you just never know what that's going to lead to. You don't know how this person that you connected with, a month ago at a networking session, how something came across their desk or a personal piece came to them and they're like, I just met someone who might be able to assist. And, Victor, I had that very same thought you said about who am I to do some of the things that I'm doing? Who am I to be, in business for myself for so many years? Who am I to, write a book? Because at one point I felt like I didn't have enough to do that. I didn't feel like I was a scholar, professional. Like, when you read books, there's a lot of statistics, there's a lot of information and citing, but it really wasn't about that because this is something that was specifically for foster youth and people who are working with them. But I had that very thought process. And I think the ultimate piece is trusting, what you're hearing and what your gut is telling you should do. And shutting out, the naysayers, honestly, sometimes because you will have that. People will not always be in your corner with what you're doing. So, another thought is, or another question is, how do you feel like you have impacted your community in what you're doing? How have you been impactful in the positions of these essential roles that you hold right now? How have you impacted?
I'll jump in. I think, like I was saying earlier, my role is really unique in the sense that I kind of have a hand on former players and their relatives, as well as being able to give that feedback to our executive director and our board and just the former football community in general. And so sometimes I'm able to get feedback directly from families, from former players' families, because we work with families at all times. So if a former player dies, their family might contact us to help with burial and things of that nature. And I have had the privilege to work with a lot of families of former players who have passed away unexpectedly, whether it's a tragedy, tragedies and suicide and things of that nature. And so it's a really unique role to be able to be a social worker. And one skill that we don't talk about enough is just sitting with people in those vulnerable places. So it's not necessarily me saying the right thing, but literally just holding the phone and helping to provide information. And so I know in those instances that my role is impactful, but moreover, especially following the situation with George Floyd, our organization formed the Racial Equity Committee, and I am the only Black employee at my organization, only Black woman. And so by forming the Racial Equity Committee, it's sort of ironic because the National Football League is composed of mostly Black and brown former players, but our organization did not have a specific arm that really kind of dealt with the nuances that our former player or the player community might be dealing with off the field. And so really forming this Racial Equity Committee has given me an opportunity to really kind of say, these are Black and brown issues, literally to be able to say it out loud. And so it really has been interesting in helping to bring in cultural sensitivity training to our organization. We have done sort of a deep dive in terms of our policies and programs, and we've had consultation. And so we've been able to sort of have conversations that, there are a lot of things that we're doing great, and how can we do those better? And then also, what are our areas of opportunity, and not just from what we think, but from a player perspective. And so I think having impact, literally my presence, I'm always thinking about, the fact that I am a social worker and a woman and a Black woman and an HBCU grad. And so that's always that intersectional perspective that I have when I'm sitting in a meeting and saying, and there's a balance, because I don't ever want to be the Black voice, but at the same time, I am sometimes. And so being able to offer just some larger perspectives as a social worker and all those hats that I wear, I think that there is impact, even when it might not necessarily be in the form of a thank you card or email, but just highlighting issues that other people might find hard to bring up. So it really is an impactful role to be able to advocate for a vulnerable community, especially one that a lot of people assume has no vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely concur with what you have just said. And certainly when you're doing something that's essential and is not known to a lot of people to be in that kind of role, and then to be Black in that role, that's a whole nother level. And, and I experienced that myself. I would often go to, RFP meetings at the State House, and then find that I'm the only Black person or business owner in that room. And so it is nice to hear, what you had to say about that, because sometimes that is the impact, is being there. That's the impact too that you can have in your community as well. Sarah, what about you?
So I am motivated by impact. Each step along the way, I didn't necessarily know where my next job was going to be. I was focused on the most impact that I could have in the current position. In helping to set up an academy for our profession, we created a mechanism for an honorific society that was with a mission to inform Congress, right? So at some point, I have a hope that organization will be actually located in Washington, D.C., and that congressional offices will frequently call upon our profession, like they do other disciplines, to advise on matters of social policy. And so when we launched the Growing Challenges for Social Work initiative, I thought, look, we're reframing what social work can do. We are working on homelessness. We are working on prevention. We are working on social isolation. We have a role in health equity and ending racism. And so that was a broad effort to kind of frame our profession in a way that really represents us, right? And that we have a science, that we're not just about feelings, that there's evidence that if you invest in some of our interventions, that we can improve human life, human well-being, reduce violence, these really kind of difficult problems in society. And, I got to NASW National. I never would have imagined that I'd be in the place to be the policy director. And then I would do that when I was just about 40 years old. And I'm here trying to figure out, well, let's draft a blueprint for the social policies agenda for the next 2 to 4 years. And I thought, well, we can theme this around the grand challenges for social work and get the academic community to endorse this document and try to have collective impact across the profession, all across all of our sister organizations. And so when I kind of I did all this kind of work in day to day, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. And when I look back and think, wow, you contributed to all this, this is a big deal. And think about some of the policy impact that we have just on a daily basis and working with the administration and federal agencies and Congress. Where the challenge is just doing the work or communicating about the work. I'm not able to do both all the time in real time. So I focus on the doing the work part, because that's what yields, some progress and hopefully more investment and opportunities for our profession and our clients.
Okay. Victor?
I think that I can tell you about one thing that I'm working on right now that I think is going to have some impact, and it's because of the fact that I have this experience of the legislative process, and as a professor, I've studied it and tried to explain it to my students. So I've always had this dream when I was a grad student and I started with NASW, and that I wanted to build a legislative network. I wanted social workers to be ready and prepared and trained to lobby their elected officials on social work issues. So what I started when I was president-elect last year, I asked our ED, I said, we have hundreds of students go to Sacramento every year for our lobby days, and I know other chapters do the same, where they have a lobby day where they go to their state legislature. And I've been involved in that lobby days. I've participated as a student as well as a faculty member, and I was always dismayed at the fact that we never ask those participants to do any other lobbying except come to Sacramento once a year. And I said, lobbying is more than just once a year, and so I always wanted to kind of have a network. So this year, I asked our ED, I said, can we put a question on the evaluation to ask participants, would they want to continue lobbying? Simple question. Can the California chapter contact you about continuing to lobby after lobby days? And I got over 120 responses covering all the state of California. And then I emailed everybody and I said, okay, get ready, because when we look at our legislative agenda for the upcoming year, we're going to engage you and we're going to say, hey, here are the issues that we, the chapter, are getting behind in the state, and we want you to help us. Because I think that's always been the missing piece, because people like Sarah, who are doing everything they can to represent all of us, but you can't do it by yourself. Right? As awesome as Sarah is, she can't do it by herself. There are thousands of us throughout the nation that if we could send an email or make a phone call, or better yet, go to a local office or create a relationship with somebody in the local district office, right? Those relationships. Oh my God, would that not have an impact on the work that you're doing, Sarah? And also benefit the work that our clients and our profession here in our home state. So I see that step as an impact in my mind. Now, hopefully it moves forward and will continue to have impact. But sometimes I think, thinking about the entrepreneurial question you had before, I think it's about building that infrastructure, right? If we can build that infrastructure, that legislative infrastructure into NASW or into our profession in some way, then that will have impact for the future. Because then students or newer social workers who are coming in can say, hey, I can plug into this legislative advocacy network of fellow social workers that are lobbying. How awesome is this? And all of a sudden, we're making things happen. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome, because that makes me think about, is there, kind of a two-part question. You kind of started to go into it, Victor. Is there anything that you would have changed? And I don't like to use the word regret, because sometimes things are what they are. Is there anything you would like to change? And is this the last stop in what you're doing? I want to hear that from everybody. And then after that, if you guys got questions, but seriously, is there anything you would change, along the way for your path that might make things a little bit easier for someone else? But, and is this your last stop?
Well, I'll say that there's nothing I would change. I mean, obviously, change. Saul Alinsky, who is my, I read his books. Famous. Many of you know of Saul Alinsky from maybe your community organizing class, but he'd always say, change means friction. Friction means heat. Heat means conflict, right? Sometimes pain. So I don't think any of us could could honestly say we are here without going through some sort of pain and difficulty. So I would want to change it, even though I look back and I say, man, those are painful times. I wouldn't want to change it, because you need to have that in order to grow and learn. Number one. But certainly this is not the end for me. In fact, in the example I just gave of this initiative, I mean, that's one of, I've got my hand in like so many different pots. I'm sure all of you are the same way. I've got my hand in so many different things that it's like I'm just throwing seeds out there and then waiting for them, watering them, waiting for them to grow. And then when some starts bearing fruit, I pick the fruit from here. Over here needs some pruning. Over there I need to put some more manure in. It's like I'm doing different things at different points just to get those plants to bear fruit, right? So it's like it reminds me that when I was a kid watching those circus programs of the guy spinning the plates, on all the different sticks, and then, he'd had to run back and forth because one plate was almost ready to fall, and then you have to go and keep spinning it around. And I mean, I used to be fascinated with that kind of stuff. And I think that's what I'm doing. I feel like I'm like trying to keep all these plates spinning in the air, but so I don't think it's over. I think in a certain sense, I think I'm just beginning, because there's so much more that I need to learn, and there's so much more that I need to do. And thankfully my wife, I told her, I don't think I'm ever going to retire. That's what I told her. She's like, great, I'm going to retire, but you want to keep working, go for it. I'm like, yeah, I don't see it, because being a social worker is such an important part of who I am that I don't, I may not be working full time by the time, when I'm older, but I am going to continue working for these important issues that we all stand for, and these social justice issues that we all believe and strive for as a profession.
Love that. I love the analogy about the place. That is so correct, because I feel like I'm juggling so many things, when you have multiple contracts and, one thing is up and another thing is down. And, I think that is so great. And I want both Sarah and Valon to, answer the question about, is this your last stop and what would you change? But that also makes me think about that whole aspect, which may be the very, next question after this. How do you stay away from that concept of, you're a jack of all trades, master of none? You've heard that before. I know you've heard that before. Keep that in your mind. But, Sarah, for you, anything you change, is this your last stop?
I wouldn't change anything about my experience and the opportunities and the individuals who I was able to work for, the systems within I was able to work. The low starting salary was very difficult. And if I didn't have to endure that, I would, it's a lot of the reason why I'm at NASW National and I do the work that I am doing now. And Victor's correct. If the 700,000 plus social workers in the country were members of the association and every chapter had constituents that were doing that lobbying, that'd be more effective than what many of us do on social media, which is complain. I would say we need to kind of redirect ourselves, because we underestimate our value if we show up, and that can happen in many different ways. So I think as a profession, we do need to kind of work together. The other thing that I might change is it's easier to get education all at one time. If I could have been privileged enough to get the PhD after my MSW, I would recommend that you do that, or even to get two master's degrees, because you get some, when you go back to school, they often tell you that many of your credits from 10 years ago are not now transferable, and it's much more expensive. And when you're working full time, it becomes extremely difficult. So get, interdisciplinary training, doing it all at one time if you're able, and trying to navigate those first couple of years. And I hope that we can make progress on that, you all. NASW is working hard to increase reimbursement and salary, and we need you all to lobby to help us do that.
I I love that. I love the idea of saying if we all rally, if we are all involved with NASWs in our local states and chapters, how much of an impact we had, just one or two, but when there's a whole fist of people, there's a dent there. And I love what you said about education because if you can get it all at one time, great. If you can make it interdisciplinary, that's awesome. Like I said before, my bachelor's in social work, my master's in business management, because I knew that there was going to be a marrying of something, in terms of either running an agency or creating my own, whatever that had to be. So I appreciate you saying that, to the degree that people can do them. Because honestly, Sarah, you talked about your thoughts about going into law, and I really had that same thought early on when I started school and I went to Indiana University. I wanted to do social work and a law, and the dual degrees. They have that now, but they didn't have that then when I was going through it. I just kind of dated myself when I said that, but they didn't have it. They didn't have it then, and so so if you can do that, do it. Make it work for you. So thank you so much for those comments, Valon. What about you?
I would say I agree with Victor and Sarah. I mean, I think every experience has helped me to be the person that I am today. But if there was something that I could change, I certainly would not have accepted as much student loan debt. Being the first generation, I was just so grateful to have been accepted, and I just accepted the package that was provided to me. So I didn't know a lot about going and literally begging, like begging in the dean's office for money but different programs for different populations and opportunities, whether it's paid internships or grant opportunities. And so I have a lot of student loan debt. And that is one thing that I would just encourage people to not have or to not get it if possible. I'm always amazed when people tell me they're fully funded or they have some child welfare grant or just things that I had no idea about. So the more I know, the more I try to share because, in hindsight, 10 years later and trying to buy a house and things of that nature, it's coming back up. And I know that this is a larger issue for our profession, which ties directly into what Sarah mentioned about the lower pay. So it's high student loan debt and lower pay. And so it's really not helping us to help ourselves or the people that we're working with as effectively. So that would be one thing that I would change. And just in terms of what's to come, I hope that I can really sort of marry my passions of sexual health and working with the pro sports and elite athlete community because I think a lot of intersections don't intersect. And so, but just, historically, the Black body and things of that nature, I hope that I can get to a point where I'm able to do some programming that sort of ties all of that into one, but we shall see how that works.
I appreciate your comments about the student debt loan because a lot of people have that. And I'm sure that, the virtual audience that's watching is like, Nelnet. Oh. They just don't go away. So it would be nice. It would be nice for, the entry salaries to really match the ability to pay for, your college, your loans, because not everybody has the ability to have family that can support them and pay for that for them. And so it really is a critical piece that needs to be looked at because I've often, and you know what, my friends used to tease me, early on in my career, they're like, you know what, you know how many jobs you have this week? I don't know that for the first 10 years of working, I always had no less than at least 2, maybe 3 jobs. And they would all be somewhat social service related, but I never heard, at least for me, the friends I had in my circle of social work where there wasn't someone who had another job besides the main job. So, and we have to get away from that. I don't know, I wouldn't say that we're the only profession that in which that happens, but it would just be great if we can really have entry salaries that will give us the ability to not have to have, another job or part-time job just to meet the regular, demands of sufficiency, as well as paying off our student loans and our debts that we have. So I know we only have like a couple minutes left. People have heard a lot of information, ideas have sparked, people are thinking, maybe I can do this. How can people get in touch with you? And this information may go out, NASW may send it, I know that they send flyers out about all the speakers, but how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more and just say, here's what I'm thinking, how do I do it? What's your best advice for me? Or just connecting with what it is that you do. I want to learn more. I want to be more active, Victor. I do want to support the policies that are happening in my community. And I did not know that there could be such a specialization with, an NFL a network. How can I implement this into some of the, sports in my community and helping people with what they do? Maybe there's another sports entity of which I can do what you're doing, Valon, maybe with soccer or, polo or whatever. How can people get a hold of you? Valon.
People can find me on LinkedIn. My profile is my name, Valon Alford, and I can be reached at valonalford@gmail.com. I'll give my personal email because the NFL Big Brother is always watching, and so oftentimes people will say they have emailed me and it may or may not come. So if you send it to my Gmail, I'm more likely to get it. So valonalford@gmail.com.
All right, awesome, Sarah.
So first, I want to encourage you all to check out NASW's 2021 Blueprint of Federal Social Policy Priorities. This outlines our work on workforce, including salary, student loan debt, entire social justice portfolio. It's over 40 pages long. You can reach me at NASW. It's sbutz at .nasw@socialworkers.org. It's on the website, and also on LinkedIn. So thank you for this opportunity. It's just been a pleasure to serve on this panel with you all. And thank you, Janetta, for serving as a moderator.
Thank you. Victor.
Yes, thank you so much, Janetta. You are awesome. Everyone, Sarah and Valon, is such an honor for me to be a part of this panel. And I'm looking forward to connecting with all of you because I need to pick all of your brains because I'm a big hockey fan. And I'm telling you, if I could get in with NHL, oh my God, I would be so happy. So I gotta, and then Sarah, I know what we're gonna continue to connect because I wanna make sure that our network is supportive of, especially the workforce, because I have so many members that want to talk to me about low pay and paid internships and all that kind of stuff. And then Janetta, oh my goodness, I need your help. I need your help.
I'm there.
There's so many things, organizational stuff. Anyways, get a hold of me. Yes, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm a huge Instagram guy. So Dr. Victor Manalo on Instagram. I don't really use my Facebook much anymore. You can also email me, victor@victormanalo.com. You can also look me up on the NASW California website, or just Google me. You'll find me. I've got a website.
Yes. Thank you. And if anyone wants to reach me, and yes, we all do have to connect after this. See, this is how it happens. You just never know that networking is at work right now. And so if people want to reach me, I too am on LinkedIn, Janetta Coleman. But you can email me directly, or you can go to my website. Actually, it has a contact form, which is www.JanettaColeman. There's no period in between, so JanettaColeman.com. And so you can reach me that way. I thank all of you, Sarah, Valon, Victor. I thank all of you for your information. I hope that this was fruitful for the audience listening. I hope it sparks some interest or reawakens some things in you that you felt like you wanted to do, and just reach out to any one of us. I know that we're all willing and willing to help someone. We're social workers. That's what we do.
That's what we do.
That's right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Caresource is a nonprofit multi-state health plan recognized as a national leader in managed care. Founded in 1989, Caresource administers one of the nation's largest Medicaid managed care plans and offers a lifetime of access to care through health insurance, including Medicaid, Health Insurance Marketplace, Medicare Advantage, and dual eligible programs. At Caresource, we work to bridge gaps to better care by improving health equity, health outcomes, and health literacy in communities where Caresource members reside. We want to be a partner in creating vibrant communities where people want to live, work, and play, ultimately driving economic growth and helping individuals lead healthy lives. Caresource serves more than 2 million members, supported by a workforce of more than 4,000 across 6 states. Caresource, we're building partnerships.